Before we dive into this story of a calculated contract and unexpected love, hit that subscribe button and the like button to join our community, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever made a decision with your head, only for your heart to completely change the plan? The billionaire's virgin bride. He needed a wife for a deal. She needed money for a life. It was simple. A cold, clean transaction drafted in the sterile air of a high-rise office overlooking a city that never slept. Damian Vance, a man whose name echoed power in every corner of the global market, sat behind his formidable desk. At 35, his life was a fortress of control, every variable accounted for, every emotion a calculated risk. His office was a reflection of the walls of polished dark wood, books that were more decor than literature, and an atmosphere thick with the scent of success and solitude. Across from him sat Alara Hayes. At 26, her world was a stark contrast, a relentless battle against mounting medical bills and the quiet despair of watching her mother fade. She was a woman forged in hardship, yet in this opulent room, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, a subtle tilt of her chin the only hint of her inner turmoil. She didn't belong here, but desperation was a powerful motivator. Between them lay the contract, not for a merger, not for an acquisition, but for a marriage. A temporary one-year arrangement. Damian's gaze, sharp and dissecting, held hers. You understand the terms? Alara met his eyes, a shade of storm gray today, and held steady. Perfectly. His lips curved into a mirthless smile. And you're willing to go through with this? A faint shrug. Why wouldn't I be? It's mutually beneficial. You secure your deal, I secure my mother's future. Simple. Simple? Damian leaned back, studying her. He needed a stable, family-oriented image to close a monumental deal with an old-money, traditional figure from the Middle East. Alara, with her lack of ties to his world and clear, desperate need for funds, was the ideal candidate. She wasn't looking for his title, his wealth for leisure, or his heart. She needed a lifeline, and his contract was exactly that. I don't tolerate complications, he stated, his voice low, a silken warning. Can you play the role of my wife without making this messy? A flicker of amusement danced in Alara's green eyes that held a depth he hadn't expected. As long as you don't expect a simpering, adoring spouse, Mr. Vance, I'll be a flawless actress. His gaze intensified. Good. She reached for the pen, her hand steady, and signed her name on the dotted line. In that moment, Alara Hayes signed away a year of her life. A year of pretense, for a chance at salvation. Neither of them knew it was the moment their carefully constructed worlds began to crumble. Damian Vance had built his empire on control, on logic, on the absolute rejection of vulnerability. Love was a myth, a tool of manipulation. He'd learned that lesson brutally years ago. Marriage? Just another transaction in the grand marketplace of life. This one, though purely for show, promised the biggest payout of his career. He found a solution in Alara Hayes, a woman who needed money, not romance. A safe bet, or so he thought. The wedding was a grand deception, a lavish affair in a ballroom dripping with crystal and attended by the city's elite. Champagne flowed, a live orchestra played, and every detail screamed, perfect. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, a chilling emptiness resided. There was no love here. Damian stood at the altar, a figure of imposing charm in his tailored suit, his expression a mask of calm indifference. Alara walked towards him, breathtakingly beautiful in a borrowed gown, her own face carefully blank. They exchanged vows that were empty promises, slid rings onto fingers that felt strangely cold. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife to polite applause, applause devoid of genuine warmth. As the cameras flashed, Damian turned to her, his voice barely audible above the celebratory din. Smile. She did. And just like that, Alara Hayes became Mrs. Vance, a title as temporary and fragile as the contract hidden away. That night, the pretense continued. Their suite was a testament to luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the dazzling city lights. Alara kicked off her heels, tension tightening her shoulders. You don't have to look so utterly miserable, Mrs. Vance, Damien remarked, pouring himself a drink. She arched an eyebrow. Forgive me for not being ecstatic about marrying a man who views me as little more than a footnote in his business portfolio. He smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You agreed. As did you, she retorted, the sharpness unexpected. A brief silence stretched, heavy with unspoken resentments. He set down his glass. The guest room is down the hall. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I have no intention of playing the role of a devoted husband. Alara let out a shaky breath, relief warring with a strange pang she couldn't name. Good. That makes two of us. She turned to leave, but his voice, suddenly firm, stopped her. One more thing. She turned back, questioning him with her eyes. He held her gaze for a long moment, that unreadable expression back. Then, the words dropped into the quiet room, stark and absolute. Don't fall in love with me, Alara. A soft, humorless laugh escaped her. Trust me, Mr. Vance. That won't be a problem. As she walked away towards the guest room, neither of them saw the invisible thread that had just snapped, nor the complicated, unintended destiny they had just sealed. It was already too late. The air in the luxurious suite felt thick, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with a reality neither had fully grasped. Alara stood by the edge of the vast bed, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar, silken fabric of the expensive nightgown she'd found laid out. Damien was behind her, his movements slow, deliberate, as he removed his cufflinks, a quiet, unsettling rhythm in the stillness. This is ridiculous, she murmured, turning to face him. He paused, a button undone on his shirt, a smirk playing on his lips. What is this? She gestured around the opulent room, the unopened bottle of champagne gleaming on the table, the unspoken expectation hanging heavy. She hugged herself, a sudden vulnerability she despised creeping in. He took a step closer, the scent of his rich, expensive cologne reaching her. You're nervous, Alara scoffed, lifting her chin higher. I don't get nervous. A bold lie, and they both knew it. Damien's eyes held a spark of pure amusement. Really? He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the sheer presence of his power. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Tell me, Alara, how many times have you done this before? Her breath hitched. The question hung in the air, loaded. Damien's smirk deepened, a predatory glint in his eyes. Ah, so you do get nervous. She took an involuntary step back, but he followed, closing the small distance. I just assumed, his voice was like dark velvet, that a woman like you, strong, independent, resilient, would have had her fair share of experience. Alara's pulse hammered against her ribs. The truth, raw and unexpected, felt impossible to voice in this charged moment, to this man. But something in his gaze, perhaps the assumption veiled as curiosity, spurred her on. I haven't, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Damien tilted his head, his expression shifting subtly. Haven't what? She swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet room. I haven't been with anyone before. Silence, profound and absolute. The smirk vanished from Damien's face. The teasing light in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by something unreadable, something akin to disbelief. He stared at her as if she had suddenly begun speaking an alien language. You're a virgin? The question was soft, almost incredulous, laced with a shock that mirrored the storm suddenly brewing in his own mind. Alara's cheeks burned, but she met his gaze squarely, defiance still her shield. Does it matter? Damien took a slow step back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disheveled. He had prepared for this night to be a formality, a charade to maintain appearances. But this revelation shattered the script. He had seen Alara as a survivor, a woman who had navigated life's rough currents, who must surely have known love, intimacy, connection. The idea that she had never been touched, never shared herself in that way with anyone. It wasn't just unexpected, it was profoundly unsettling. For the first time in a long time, Damian Vance, the man who always had an answer, always had a plan, was utterly, completely at a loss. The simple transaction had just become infinitely, dangerously complicated. What do you think will happen next after that shocking discovery? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, and if you're enjoying the story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next part. The next morning, Damian sat in his pristine office, the city sprawling below him a blur. The multi-million-dollar contract lay on his desk, a blueprint for the expansion he'd chased for years. Yet, for the first time in his career, the numbers swam meaningless. His mind was a chaotic storm, fixated not on market projections, but on a pair of defiant green eyes and a whispered confession from the night before. He, Damian Vance, the man who controlled everything, felt a tremor of something utterly unfamiliar. Disarray. He'd spent years perfecting the art of emotional detachment, viewing feelings as liabilities. But Alara Hayes, his contract wife, had somehow breached his defenses without even trying. He couldn't shake the image of her standing in the suite, vulnerable yet resolute, admitting a truth that defied his cynical expectations. "Sir," his assistant's voice cut through the haze. Damian blinked, refocusing. "Yes, you've been staring at that contract for nearly an hour." He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day." The assistant nodded, retreating quietly, leaving Damian alone with the echoing silence and the unwelcome echoes in his own head. This wasn't part of the plan. He wasn't supposed to care. Alara was a temporary solution, a means to an end. But now, he found himself watching her in the rare moments their paths crossed in the penthouse. Noticing things, the way sunlight caught the highlights in her hair, the quiet strength in her posture even when she seemed lost in thought, the subtle way her brow furrowed when she was concentrating, or the brief, genuine smile that transformed her face moments she clearly didn't know he witnessed. He saw not the desperate woman who signed a contract, but a depth, a resilience that fascinated and unsettled him. And the worst, most dangerous realization. He felt a nascent, unwelcome surge of possessiveness. The thought of any other man looking at her, speaking to her, touching her. It made his jaw clench with a primal instinct he had buried long ago. Control was slipping, and Damian Vance had no idea how to regain his grip. For Alara, the days that followed the wedding night were a study in confusion. Damian Vance was different. His cold indifference seemed to soften at the edges. The sharp wit sometimes gave way to observations that felt almost tender. He'd appear unexpectedly, his gaze lingering a moment too long, or subtly position himself closer to her in public spaces, a silent barrier between her and the outside world. Why? Why would a man who saw her as a mere asset suddenly show glimpses of concern? It was unsettling, dangerous, and against her better judgment. A tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the barren landscape of her expectations. One evening, sitting across from him at the impossibly long dining table, she couldn't hold back any longer. "You've changed," she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands beneath the table. Damian raised an eyebrow, a hint of that familiar smirk returning. "Have I?" "Yes." She leaned forward slightly, searching his eyes. "You're acting strange." The smirk widened. "Strange how?" "You're nicer." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that surprised her. "Let's not go that far, Alara." She narrowed her eyes. "You used to look at me like I was an inconvenience. Now you look at me like—" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Damian's smirk faded, replaced by an intensity that stole her breath. "Like what?" "Like you don't know what to do with me." Silence stretched between them, taut and charged. The air crackled with an unspoken energy. Then, Damian did something she never could have predicted. He reached across the vast table, his fingers brushing against hers. A fleeting, electric touch that sent a jolt straight to her core. His voice, when he finally spoke, was softer than she had ever heard it. "Maybe I don't." Alara's heart leaped. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls around her own feelings began to tremble. This wasn't just a contract anymore. This was something else entirely. Something neither of them had been prepared for. Damien had always controlled the narrative, dictated the terms. But with Alara, he was losing control, and he both resented and was strangely drawn to the feeling. He tried distance, burying himself in work, convincing himself that putting space between them would restore his equilibrium. Failed. Every quiet moment, every empty room, reminded him of her unexpected presence in his life, in his thoughts. He watched her move through his opulent world, so different yet fitting in with an innate grace. Then came the night everything shattered. Alara had gone out for what should have been a simple errand. Damien knew she was capable, independent. He told himself to ignore the faint unease that stirred within him. But then his phone buzzed, an unknown number, a cold, digital voice. "You might want to check on your wife, Mr. Vance. She's in trouble." His chest constricted. Logic vanished. Instinct took over. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the penthouse, the cold city air hitting him like a physical blow. Alara stepped into the dimly lit parking garage, clutching her small bag of necessities. The silence felt heavy, wrong. 3 steps in, she felt it, a presence. Turning sharply, her heart hammering against her ribs, she saw him, a man in a dark, nondescript hoodie, stepping from the shadows. "Your mother owes a lot of money, sweetheart." His voice was low, rough, sending a chill down her spine. Alara's grip tightened on the bag. "I don't have anything to give you." He smirked, a cruel flash of teeth in the gloom. "Oh, I think you do. You're Mrs. Damien Vance now, aren't you?" Before she could even process his words, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp, cold, utterly lethal. "She's under my protection." The man barely had time to turn before a fist connected with his jaw. A sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground. Alara gasped, frozen, staring as Damien Vance loomed over the figure on the pavement, his eyes dark with a fury she had never witnessed. "If you or anyone else ever threatens my wife again," Damien's voice was calm, deadly, a chilling contrast to the violence he just displayed, "I will destroy you. Do you understand?" The man scrambled backward, nodding frantically before disappearing into the night. Alara stood rooted to the spot, breath ragged, heart still pounding. "Damien!" He spun around, his eyes blazing with a raw, protective intensity that stole her voice. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his gaze scanning her frantically for any sign of injury. She shook her head, unable to form coherent words. "You? Why are you here?" His jaw tightened, the fire in his eyes unwavering. "Because you're my wife." The simple declaration hung in the air, a truth and a lie intertwined. It wasn't about the contract anymore. In his eyes, his voice, the raw power of his presence, Alara saw it. Damien Vance cared, and that terrified them both more than any threat ever could. A fragile, dangerous hope sparked within her. Could this impossible man, this ruthless billionaire, actually feel something for her? Just days later, that fragile hope was brutally extinguished. Alara was heading towards Damien's office when she heard voices from inside. The door was slightly ajar. One voice she recognized instantly, Marcus Thorne, Damien's longtime friend and business partner. "You've been distracted, man," Marcus was saying. "Nothing ever gets to you like this. But ever since this marriage." A sigh. Then Damien's voice, cool and controlled. "Is temporary. You know that." Alara's breath hitched, freezing her in the hallway. Marcus chuckled. "Are you sure? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you actually care about her." A long pause. Then, a sharp, humorless laugh from Damien, a sound that scraped against Alara's soul. "This marriage is a business deal, Marcus," he said, his voice hardening, erasing every moment of tenderness, every look, every protective instinct she thought she'd seen. That's all it's ever been. As soon as the year is up, we'll both move on. Alara's world shattered. The hallway seemed to tilt. Every shared glance, every unexpected kindness, every possessive gesture. Had it all been a performance? A lie? She stumbled back from the door, numb, a cold dread spreading through her limbs. How could she have been so foolish? To dare to hope? There was only one thing she could do. She had to get out. That night, Damien returned to the silent, expansive penthouse, expecting the usual quiet presence of Alara. Instead, he found a chilling emptiness, punctuated by the stark, undeniable sight of her packed suitcase by the door. His breath caught in his chest, a cold knot forming in his gut. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharper than he intended, betraying the sudden tremor of fear that snaked through him. Alara didn't look at him, her back rigid. "Leaving." He took a step closer, the click of his shoes on the polished floor echoing in the sudden vastness of the apartment. "Alara." She finally turned, and the sight of her face stopped him cold. Her eyes, usually so full of quiet strength, were raw with pain, betrayal, and a heartbreaking finality that punched the air from his lungs. "I heard you today," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "Talking to Marcus." Damien froze. The casual cruelty of his own words, spoken without a second thought hours ago, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. Alara let out a breathless, humorless laugh, a sound of pure desolation. "It was just a business deal, right? That's all I've ever been to you." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. It's not that simple." She shook her head slowly, tears glistening but not falling. "It is. And the worst part." Her voice cracked, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I actually started to believe, but I won't make that mistake again." Damien took a step forward, desperation creeping into his tone, a vulnerability he never allowed anyone to see. "Alara, wait, please." She lifted a hand, a fragile barrier. "No, I'm done." With that, she picked up her suitcase, the small weight a symbol of her resolve, and walked towards the elevator. Damien watched her go, paralyzed, feeling something he had actively avoided his entire life. Loss. Real, gut-wrenching, soul-deep loss. For the first time, Alexander Sterling, the man who could fix anything with money or influence, had no idea how to fix the chasm that had just opened before him. The penthouse felt hollow without her. The city lights, once a symbol of his dominion, now mocked him with their indifferent sparkle. He sat alone in the darkened living room, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him, the silence amplifying the truth that was now suffocatingly clear. He had lied to himself for so long, believing love was a weakness, an unnecessary complication in his controlled existence. But Alara had shattered that lie. He loved her, and he had let her walk away. The next morning, urgency, a feeling alien to his calculated world, propelled him. He leveraged every contact, pulled every string, his empire's resources focused on a single objective: find Alara Hayes. But she had disappeared, vanished like a whisper in the wind. Nothing. The realization hit him: money, power, influence. They were useless against a heart he had broken. He had never been more afraid. Desperation was an unfamiliar cloak, heavy and suffocating. But Damien Vance was willing to set his world on fire if it meant finding her, earning her forgiveness, proving the truth he'd only just grasped. His first stop wasn't a boardroom, but a hospital, the one where Alara's mother was receiving treatment. The medical bills that had driven Alara into his arms had piled up for years. Without a moment's hesitation, he settled every last cent. He didn't tell Alara. This wasn't a transaction. It was an act born of a feeling he finally acknowledged. Then came the decision that sent tremors through his own board of directors. He walked away from the billion-dollar deal, the very deal that had started the charade, the deal that had once been the pinnacle of his ambition. His partner, Marcus Thorne, had looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Damien, you fought for this for years." "Maybe," Damien had replied, the conviction firm in his voice. "Maybe I was fighting for the wrong thing." For the first time, The ruthless billionaire chose love over legacy, heart over ledger. There was only one step left. Find Alara. It took time, persistence, and a humility he never knew he possessed. But eventually, the trail led him to a small, quiet coastal town, miles away from the steel and glass of his world. She had rented a modest apartment near the ocean, seeking refuge, peace, a life untouched by calculated contracts and cold hearts. Damien stood before her door, his heart pounding a rhythm more terrifying and exhilarating than any high-stakes negotiation. He knocked. The door opened, and there she was. Alara's eyes widened the moment she saw him, a mixture of shock and guardedness clouding their green depths. For a long moment, neither spoke, the sound of the distant waves filling the silence. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet, wary, building walls he knew he had to dismantle. He took a steadying breath, the salty air sharp in his lungs. "I needed to see you." She crossed her arms, a familiar shield. "Why?" His throat felt tight, raw with unspoken truths. He forced the words out, stripped bare of artifice. "Because I was wrong." Alara let out a sharp, humorless laugh, a mirror of the one he'd heard that devastating night. "Oh, now you realize that." Damien swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. "I messed up. I lied to myself. I told myself it was just a deal, just business." His voice softened, losing its hard edges. "But it was never just business, Alara." He took a step closer, laying his soul bare. "I love you." The raw, unfiltered confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Alara's breath hitched, but she didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression a complex mix of shock and deep-seated hurt. And for the first time in his life, Damien Vance felt truly, completely exposed. Alara's heart was a chaotic drumbeat against her ribs. For weeks, she had clung to the belief that leaving was the only way to protect herself, that her heart, though bruised, was still intact. But standing here now, looking into Damien's eyes, seeing the raw honesty she'd never seen before, she knew she'd been lying to herself. She loved him. The terrifying question was, could she trust him? Could the man who saw her as a contract truly be capable of the depth of feeling reflected in his gaze? "I don't know if I can trust you, Damien." Her voice was quiet, hesitant, the fragile truth of her fear. His expression softened further, the mask of the ruthless billionaire finally shattered. "Then let me prove it to you." She searched his face, the planes of his jaw, the depth in his storm-gray eyes, and saw not the calculated strategist, but the man beneath. A man who had finally torn down his own walls. A man who looked at her with a love so profound it stole her breath. And maybe, just maybe, the fragile spark of her own love hadn't died after all. Alara stood on the small balcony, gazing out at the vast, restless ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, a steady, relentless rhythm, much like the storm still raging within her. Behind her, Damien waited, patient, silent, a stark contrast to the man he used to be. He hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded. He had simply offered his truth and waited for her to find hers. Could she? She had spent weeks nursing her hurt, convincing herself that walking away was the only path to safety. But he was here now, not offering a contract, but offering himself. She turned to face him, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside. "You expect me to just believe you've changed?" Damien exhaled slowly, a sound of quiet acceptance. "No, I don't expect that. But I hope you'll give me the chance to prove it." Alara studied him, searching for any flicker of the old calculation, the hidden agenda. There was none. Only raw, unguarded truth in his eyes. She could walk away, start over, build a life far from the complexities of his world. But the thought of a life without him in it, it felt achingly hollow, a landscape without color, and that terrified her more than anything. She took a shaky breath, her gaze locking with his. "If I stay, this has to be real, Damien. No more games, no more contracts, just us." His jaw clenched, then the tension released, replaced by a wave of relief that flooded his eyes. "Just us." he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. And for the first time, Alara Hayes allowed herself to truly believe. The next morning, they walked along the beach, the salty breeze tangling in Alara's hair. Damien reached for her hand, not out of possession or obligation, but simply because he wanted to hold her. This time, she didn't pull away. "I paid off your mother's medical bills," he admitted after a long silence, the words quiet against the sound of the waves. Alara stopped, turning to him, her eyes wide. You did what?" "I didn't do it because of the contract," he said quickly, as if reading the question forming in her mind. "I did it because I wanted to, because I care, because I love you." Her chest tightened. She had believed for so long that he saw everything as a transaction. But standing here, feeling the warmth of his hand, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized he had already proven his love in ways words couldn't capture. Still, the hurt wouldn't vanish instantly. She crossed her arms, a ghost of her old defense. "You realize that just because you love me, it doesn't magically fix everything, right?" Damien smirked, a genuine, soft expression this time. "I never expected it to." Alara's gaze softened. "Love isn't enough, Damien. Trust takes time." His expression grew tender. "Then I'll give you all the time you need." Her heart skipped a beat, a hopeful flutter, because this time, for the very first time, Damien Vance wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was simply choosing her. And that was all the difference in the world. A week later, Damien stood by his car, watching as Alara locked the door to her modest apartment for the last time. She walked towards him, a small smile playing on her lips, carrying a single suitcase, much lighter this time. "No contracts this time?" she teased, the light back in her eyes. Damien smirked, opening the passenger door. "No contracts? No conditions?" He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No conditions. Just us." Alara looked up at him, a long, searching gaze, before making her final choice. Then, with a deep breath, she got into the car. As Damien slid into the driver's seat beside her, he reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. This time, there were no lies, no pretenses, no transactions. Just them, bound not by paper and ink, but by something infinitely stronger. Love. What started as a cold business deal had blossomed into a real, undeniable love story. Damien Vance, the man who believed love was a weakness, learned it was his greatest strength, a choice made every single day. And Alara Hayes, who entered a fake marriage out of desperation, found a love that was real, imperfect, but worth fighting for. And that's the story of how a calculated contract led to an unexpected forever. If this tale touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs a good story, and comment below what you thought of Damien and Alara's journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this one.